go further back, see who else could before the Chinese. So I thought, well, okay, I'll try. And I did. I investigated, went further and further back, and I found, to my astonishment, that in fact the Babylonian astronomers could calculate longitude certainly by 650 BC, quite probably by 750 BC, and possibly by 1600 BC. So some 3,000 years before Copernicus and Galileo, and indeed before the Chinese, the Babylonians from Mesopotamia had accurate star tables which enabled them to calculate latitude and longitude, and therefore sail to different parts of the world if they had the capacity, and return in safety. Now, all of that knowledge came from friends of our website. And as I gradually picked up the story, which I've put into a third book called Lost Treasures of Atlantis, about Babylonian and Mesopotamian astronomy, we've had help all the way along the line from the people on our website. So all three of my books have been collective endeavors. We've relied heavily all the way through on continuous corrections, advice, disagreement and agreement, and new evidence from people in 130 countries across the world who visit our website basically almost every day.
So really the website is a receptive vehicle for continuous discovery.
It's very, very important, incredibly useful. Of course, one gets nutters who, but then they're pretty easy to sort out because others will do it for you. So if somebody comes along and says the Pope's a woman and produces evidence that he says shows that, we could put that up on and it would be destroyed in about 20 minutes from a barrage of people saying, don't be so utterly ridiculous. So it's an incredibly important tool, and one which, as I say, in my view, will revolutionize history and the profession of history.
I wonder why it is that once we find out this amount of evidence for something, Gavin, why won't school books for kids get changed?
I think it takes time. If you go down and see what happened with 1421, now it's on sale in 130 countries in 41 editions, and it's selling as well now as it did when it was published 8 years ago. So gradually the message gets through, and I get invited to talk at universities and conferences and things, and that they're usually reported, and that again means the message does get put abroad, as one might say. So it's just, I think one has to be patient, and I think it's fair to say you can't possibly expect historians who spent their lives, say, describing Columbus' voyage to the Americas, whether he passed north or south of a particular sandbank, and then they learn it's all irrelevant anyway because he had a map, and he also had a contract in his pocket with the King of Spain, and he was going to be Viceroy of America. He wasn't going to discover anything because they knew it's already there.
I guess my question is, why is history told the way it's told then? Who is telling the history?
Well, I think one must expect a great deal of stubbornness in that, again, if you're a professor of history and you've been teaching this stuff, relying on, say, Chinese scholars for a certain amount of information, and you don't want to readily admit it's all, you've been teaching nonsense. And there's people's reputations, their pensions, their school fees for their children, and so on. So I think basically the man in the street is very, very shrewd, receptive, and sensible. And they're the people who are going to change history in the end, because they'll start saying, well, Now, why is my children being taught? Why are they being taught Columbus discovered America? And it's perfectly obvious he didn't. Why are they being taught Magellan discovered the Straits of Magellan when it's obvious he had a map showing him the Straits before he got there? So eventually it will all get changed, but we just have to be patient and keep going.
Do you think it'll happen in your lifetime?
No, I don't. I'm 73, and I think it'll take 20 years or so, probably.
Well, I want you to be alive to see it. So you better stay well.
Well, the second wave of books has come out. A number of books have followed mine about different aspects of the story. For example, the discovery of America. A scientist called Dr. S.L. Lee, who is a professor and an academic, who was quite a critic of my book, 1421, he found by complete chance a medallion buried in Asheville, North Carolina, which was a power of attorney given by the Xuande Emperor, that's the emperor who was in power in China in 1431 to 1436. And this power of attorney authorizes the holder to act on his behalf. Now, it appeared to Dr. Lee that the only people who would have such a power of attorney from the Chinese emperor were seafarers who had reached North Carolina in 1434. So he started research into the background to this medallion, and he found that the local peoples of that part of North Carolina have all sorts of links with China. For example, their flag is the same as the Admiral Shanker's flag.
Wow.
They make very fine pottery. Their DNA has Chinese or East Asian admixture, and so on. So he has just presented all this evidence at a conference in Malacca, and he's going to he's written a book which he hopes is going to be published soon. Another sort of major book has come out from a lady called Charlotte Harris Rees, who inherited a lot of Chinese maps from her father, and they're maps of the Americas. And they go right back to 200 BC. So she has put all these maps in a book, and she can show that Chinese had been exploring long before Admiral Shanker, and they'd been back and forth to the Americas for 2,000 years. So that's the second major book.
By the way, we did do an interview with her, and I did read her book and saw it on your site. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, now, a third really major book is that Shanker's diaries, the Admiral Shanker, who commanded Chinese fleets between 1405 and 1434, his diaries have been found, and they've been translated by two American professors called Mark and Laurie Nicholas. And the diaries describe his voyage from Alexandria, that's
Egypt,
where on the North Egyptian coast, major port. He sailed from the Mediterranean port of Alexandria westwards across the Mediterranean to Carolinas, and he describes getting there and the city of Cahokia as it was in 1434. And so these diaries of Shanker are, in my view, very, very interesting. They will be published in a few months' time. And so people will say, well, hold on. If the Chinese admiral got to the Americas in 1434, how come we say Columbus discovered the Americas?
Are you saying 1434 or 1421?
1434.
Okay.
And then there's the book by Paul Chiasson, which describes an Asian base which he's found on a promontory near his home, a place called Cape Dauphin, in the northeast part of Canada. And his book has been published and is a bestseller in Canada. So there's a storm of controversy